Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and a warm welcome to those attending and also to our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. This is a meeting of the Resident Services Select Committee and my name is Councillor Wayne Bridges. I'm chairman of this meeting. The key role of this committee is to monitor the performance of local public services within its remit and hold in-depth reviews on topics of resident interest. We engage with a range of external witnesses in our activity, which can include community groups, residents and subject matter experts. Where we identify areas for change or improvement, we make recommendations to the decision-making cabinet. Details of the business to be considered today is shown on the agenda, copies of which are available in the room and also accessible on YouTube underneath the broadcast. For those present in the room and intending to speak, please note that you will be filmed and any statements you make will be recorded and made public. And for those in the public gallery, you will not be on camera. A reminder to council officers and those speaking today, you should turn the microphone button on when speaking. This will ensure that you can be heard in the room and by those watching online. Some quick housekeeping rules before we go on to our main agenda. We are not expecting a fire alarm this evening. However, if one does sound, please follow the officers to the fire exits out of the building to the designated meeting point, which is the Civic Centre forecourt. Mobile devices to be placed on silent or switched off. And we also have resident feedback forms at the back of the room if residents are present and wish to contribute in feedback. With that said, we go on to apologies for absence, please.
Chairman, there have been no apologies for absence.
Thank you very much. Are there any declaration of interest in matters coming before this meeting? I can see no indications. Thank you. Item 3 is to receive the minutes of the previous meeting, pages 1 to 10. Any comments or questions, or can they be agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. I can confirm that all business this evening will be discussed in Part 1. There are no Part 2 items to be considered. Which moves us on to Item 5, a review of the alligating in Hillingdon, our witness session, pages 11 to 20. And we have a number of witnesses here this evening who will be joining us to give their presentation this evening. Chief Inspector James Herring, Inspector Dan Lipinski, Adam Stitson, Helena Webster and Neil O'Connor. Perhaps, Helen, if I may start with you to give a talk, and then we'll go around the table with the relevant people present. Thank you.
Yes, certainly, Chairman. And just for clarity for the minutes, there are apologies from Chief Inspector James Herring. As you know, we're midway through a review of alligating in Hillingdon. The service was established over 17 years ago, whereby residents are assisted with grant funding to secure alleyways, particularly in instances with high antisocial behaviour such as fly tipping and burglary, and to examine ways that any aspects of the service can be improved. At the last meeting in February, there were witnesses from residents living in areas where gates had been installed. We can advise councillors as a follow-up. Officers attended a site meeting with Paulette McGovern and Jane Turnbull, and this confirmed that there was one gate which needed attention, and this is actually being progressed through the new refurbishment scheme. So that's being acted upon as well. Tonight we're joined by Adam Stitson, Team Leader, ASB and Environmental Protection, and Inspector Dan Lipinski, really in their roles to give feedback in terms of how gating may help to reduce and design out crime and the impact on antisocial behaviour. I think for the purpose of this meeting, on the rear of the paper there are some suggested questions that councillors might like to ask as well, and I'll hand over to our witnesses.
Thank you very much. I'll base what I'm going to say on the questions that Helena has referred to, if that's okay. The alligating schemes utilised by the borough, we do believe, have led to a reduction in crime. Certainly as far as antisocial behaviour goes, service requests and complaint levels do drop off after alligating has been installed in residential areas. And this particularly relates to fly tipping, which is probably, in terms of the council, the primary reason for the installation of alligating. There are obviously other criminal matters which the police would probably like to speak about, but that's the primary one for fly tipping, and these do indeed assist in terms of that, and we base that on the levels of service requests coming into the council. In terms of how the current alligating scheme could be improved, the crux of that is that the system is dependent upon how it is utilised post-installation. And the most important facet of that, we believe, is resident buy-in in terms of the actions necessary to keep the system going. So in other words, what you need are all residents to take responsibility for being useful key holders, for ensuring that the gates are opened and closed properly, and that any issues are discussed beforehand. What that means is, in effect, is that prior to installation, there is a clear understanding from those who are utilising and benefiting from the system as to how it is best used. And the council can assist in that process, but it's very important to get that message across and ensure that there is strict buy-in to that system. I understand there's an issue, an interest in any hotspots in the borough where alley gates are broken, regularly left unlocked, leading to an increase in crime or antisocial behaviour. I would say that these are not geographical hotspots. The key factors in issues such as gates broken or left open are twofold, really. One is the aforementioned residential buy-in, and often what happens when people move out and other people move in, that is a potential gap where the system can fail. So there needs to be a literal handover of keys and other artefacts, but also a handover in terms of behaviour and the system, so that is moved from resident to resident. The length of time that the gates have been installed is a key factor there. The longer they've been installed, the more likely it is that the system is likely to break down. And I do know that my colleagues in community engagement are looking at that and working around databases of key holders, annual checks, how best to communicate best practice to residents. So that is certainly part of dealing with those hotspots and issues around that. There's a question around police officers patrolling the area. I will leave that to Dan to answer that question there. I do know he's keen to do so. One of the interesting things, I think, is the actions taken by the ASB in particular to address residents' concerns prior to the implementation of an alley gating system. This, of course, is important because if the actions taken by the ASB team are particularly effective, it may negate the necessity of installing alley gating. So it's something that we may not have to do or choose to do. Now, the key thing here is the evidence. Again, the two main things I'd say in terms of alleys are fly tipping from the point of view of the council, and also alleys are associated with various levels of crime. This can range from public order offences, noise nuisance, and alleged drug dealing. So what we would want is, of course, the primary characteristic, which is evidence. In terms of fly tipping, we would want to know who is committing this offence. So we can do that. We can go through bags of rubbish. We can go through fly tipping. We can look at the quantity of that is taking place in an area, and that, of course, is important if you're talking about alligating, identifying the perpetrators, serving whatever kind of direct enforcement action may be necessary on them. This can range from fixed penalty notices to prosecutions, depending on the frequency and severity of the offences noted. One of the other items we can use prior to the installation of alligating can be more general actions. One of the popular requests we have is to write to all residents of a local area regarding issues such as fly tipping. This is of limited effectiveness, frankly, because it's quite easy to ignore a general letter addressed to the occupant, and less so if the correspondence is directed at people individually by name. It may have some small measure of deterrent effect, but to be honest, it's nowhere near as effective as highlighting and identifying specific perpetrators of antisocial behaviour. With regard to other criminal matters, it's obviously something that we would liaise with the police about. We can gather information. Part of the council's role is to act as an intelligence gathering service and disseminating that information later. I think you're also going to be hearing tonight about changes to the Antisocial Behaviour team and our introduction of localities-based working, which the Council believes will assist in having an integrated approach involving other services such as the police in terms of moving us forward on this area. I think there's another question related to the residents being assisted through the application process. I'm sure my colleagues in community engagement would be able to say something about that. I'm quite happy to take any questions that the...
Thank you, Adam. I think at this stage I'm happy for another officer presentation, or perhaps from the police, before we go on to questions. So Dan, perhaps you can go next, please.
Thank you. I'm Dan Lipinski. I'm from the Safe and Liberty teams out on Hillingdon. When I first was trying to get to the bottom of the exact question that was being asked for me today, it was quite a difficult one for me because this unit is pretty much self-autonomous and they do it alone. So what we have on Hillingdon is something called, well, on West Area, is something called a design out crime team, and they work everything from hostile vehicle mitigation to sanctuary schemes to protection of women, vulnerable women in houses, securing people from domestic violence. That unit has stated that they do an excellent job and they've had minimal interaction. One of the questions was in relation to patrolling. We're obviously intelligence-led. Whenever we have received information, we get it from the Community Safety Partnership at Hillingdon, and we have taken action in relation to intelligence-led patrolling from then on. The teams, when they require support, we've had a team that would be dedicated to that unit to address those issues. However, there's certain changes going forwards. The design out crime team were actually going to be in attendance here because they are actually experts in physical security, and they would have given you a really, really good input on, for example, their 15-page instruction book on how to create successful alligating and the prerequisites that's designed to deter, delay, detect. Unfortunately, due to the train strikes, they couldn't come, so he gave me a testimonial. But prior to that, I wanted to read testimonials from the officers that are actually on the wards. So you have Ruislip saying that we've got many alligators on our ward. I would say they're a good idea and very worthwhile. They're usually a street organiser in charge, and however only fail when they're left open. But most of all, definitely positive having them in place. Again, another one from South Ruislip. Very effective, as we don't really get reports of issues in these alley gated areas. In South Ruislip, some of the residents have keys and the alley gates, and they're good at making sure the gates are locked. Exactly what Adam was saying regarding the uptake and the community actually giving back and the buy-in to actually making the scheme work. Again, Ruislip, extremely good at reducing fly tipping, burglaries. Again, that won't necessarily affect burglaries when they're forcing entry through the front. However, if there is a clear area which is physically insecure, such as unlighted, darkened alleyways where people can gain access to numerous gardens from the rear, this is the kind of thing that would be beneficial. People don't want to be disrupted or have to go for an obstacle. They will go for the easiest target. It's like osmosis, they'll flow towards the easiest target. One from Hayes, Alleygates, installed in Thornton Avenue West Drayton, runs behind Tesco's Extra. Alley was blighted with ASB, people urinating, defecating, drug dealing. Post-installation, zero interest, zero issues over the last 4 years. Gates kept closed at all times, and the properties have had access to the alleys have kept all their keys so they can unlock, obviously, that part. The only issues, obviously, come when they're council or private owned. I've disseminated to the chair the current crime package, if that wants to be disseminated out later. Is there any questions for me?
Thank you, Dan. Just to confirm, I will circulate that to members of the committee. It's quite a meaty document, so it'll be worth reading. Neil, would you like to comment at all before I invite questions from members?
I've just taken some notes of the last 6 alligating schemes. I think, as Adam mentioned, fly tipping is pretty much the main one. Burglary, drug taking, drug dealing, people loitering. We will always, with our schemes, contact the local Safer Neighbourhood team, inform them of the scheme, ask for a written consent from them that they are happy for us to install the gates if they have any concerns, if they want to include any feedback. The most recent one, the application came in. I think they'd unfortunately, one of the neighbours had suffered from a burglary from the rear. They came in through the rear garden, through the rear of the house. The Safer Neighbourhood team wrote back within, I think it was hours. They were fully aware of the situation and gave their support straight away. And I think we're just waiting for the lead applicant to arrange payment, and we'll have the order with the gating company within the next few days. So it's a really quick turnaround.
Thank you very much. At this point now, I'll invite questions from members, and if we could start with Councillor Smallwood, please.
Thank you, Chair. Inspector Lipinski, you are a big advocate of OWL, which I massively thank you for. But I just wondered whether there was one of the things when the residents came to see us, one of the challenges they faced was some low-level crime, but also just some practical stuff around finding people who had keys, or finding new people that may be able to look after the keys, or finding someone that run the bank account. Do you think something like OWL that we already have in place would be somewhere that we could use? Because obviously alligators are a crime prevention as well as a safety, whether we could use that to support some of the work we're doing.
As you sadly mentioned, I am an OWL advocate, and I fully support that. I am actually the chair of the OWL steering group for the whole of West area, and it's something I'm passionate about because it meets all of the public's needs, all of our partners' needs, and it should be utilised a lot more. There is a push towards a business watch. The onus on Alligates is the residents support the council. I've seen issues where there's been problems over bank accounts, who has ownership over keys, over periods of time changing in steering groups, creates problems releasing money and losing keys to... I believe the gates themselves cost anywhere between £500 and £1,700 per gate. So losing a key to it, which is meant to be a secure thing, is obviously a bad thing. I cannot commit to a promise on behalf of other people. Are you with me? If it was in relation to OWL, the push for the message for the community support all day, in relation to try and make promises for certain groups, associations to actually take ownership and a bit more responsibilities out of my remit, I'm afraid. But it is something that we would heavily push for and support within our Business Watch programme, instead of the community as an individual, businesses getting together, talking about their business district and supporting each other. So that is a key example would be an alleyway behind a group of shops where it's a business is all supporting each other. So yeah, that is something heavily I would support and push for.
Councillor Small, would you like a follow-up?
No, thank you.
Councillor Sullivan?
Thank you, Chair. Adam, this one's for you. You mentioned with the Alligates, fly tipping, there was reduction in fly tipping. This is not strictly true, because one of the Alligates, actually Paulette McGowan, looks after. There's been a lot of fly tipping there, where there's been piles and piles of mattresses and things, and I managed to get it cleared. I know it's not council's responsibility, but what happens in that, if that happens again? Thank you.
With all those, Councillor, thank you for the question. We would have to look at the specifics of the individual area in case. You're totally right. The idea is that once the gates are installed, residents take responsibility for what has happened. If it is clearly, as in the case that you mentioned, a very large-scale problem, the council obviously can't just walk away. We would obviously engage with the residents in question, try and find out as much information as possible. There would probably be some encouragement at the beginning of the process for residents to try and resolve the matter themselves. Clearly, in the example you've given with the case of very large-scale fly tipping, that's going to be difficult at every level, difficult for them to remove, and presumably difficult for them to enforce. Now, of course, if it becomes to the stage where there's huge quantities of mattresses or other large-scale items, we would have to look at how we employ resources such as CCTV, if possible. We would have to look at how we can try and identify the perpetrators. We would obviously want to look at, is this related to other instances of large-scale fly tipping throughout the borough? Towards the end of last year, we were able to secure a conviction against a very, very large-scale fly tipper who had been doing such activities, not just in this borough, but in other parts of the country as well, which resulted in a custodial sentence. So the summary of my answer then is it will depend on what's going on. I think overall, if you look at alligating, it does assist in the reduction of fly tipping. Clearly, it hasn't in that particular instance that you've mentioned, but I think there would be both an evidence gathering exercise, a discussion of how we can use both resources both within and external to the council to try and deal with the problem, a very strong engagement with local residents to both take on their views and opinions, and also some instruction and advice from the council to try and ensure that there's a long-term and proportionate solution to that situation secured. Thank you.
Councillor Gohill.
Thank you, Chairman. I suppose my question's to anyone who may wish to answer it. My question just relating to the remit of what we as a council can do to help deter this further. And kind of one idea I had in my head that, may be viable, may not be, but I'm just going to mention it anyway in case it hasn't been explored, is perhaps the inclusion of video doorbells. So a lot of households use ones like Ring doorbells, for example, on their households to try and deter crime, try and deter antisocial behaviour, but also to report it as well. Would there be any, has it been explored, or would there be any remit of maybe installing one of these type of video doorbells on or near the gates, just to get an idea of if, people are leaving it open, what we don't, because it was awful to hear about the lady who'd been robbed because the gate had been left open, but if you could see if the gate was being left open, or if someone had pickpocketed or whatever, or if there, is drug dealing going on at the gate, or antisocial behaviour, then it'll be easier to pick these things up with a camera there, or it could very well deter it. Has that been something that's been explored, or is that something maybe the council can take on to maybe subsidise them? They're not very expensive, but I don't know where we could go with this, but it's just an idea.
I'll deal with one aspect of that question, if I may, Councillor. Thank you. In terms of Ring doorbells and indeed any other video evidence, that the council will happily take those from residents in terms of anything that's there. And of course, it may be that devices, cameras, etc., already installed may well be able to assist. And I think probably the council would want to try and rule that out first before entering into any kind of extra expenditure in terms of the installation of cameras or anything on the alley gates themselves. And I believe that it probably wouldn't be a standard feature. So I won't say any more about the possibility or otherwise of it being installed, but we do take on board electronic and video evidence supplied by residents. Thank you.
Technology speaking, I don't think that's practical because the Ring doorbell will have to piggyback off someone's Wi-Fi. So the whole issue, which I've had this robust conversations with our CCTV manager. Unfortunately, if we put a CCTV camera everywhere in Hillingdon where there was an incident or a emerging incident, the entirety of Hillingdon would be covered by CCTV. So it's all intelligence-led, risk-led. It is a really cheap, viable option, but not in that specific. With technology moving across every single day, when we cocoon during incidents, part of the cocooning process is they will go around and spot Ring doorbells. We're like sounding like a sponsorship for Ring here, but I'm trying to find the alternatives. And it is becoming a surveillance street, but passively. The police won't be doing it because of the Regulation Against Investigatory Powers Act, but if there's passive stuff going on people's doorbells that we can gain, then that's a positive for us.
Councillor Gohill, would you like a supplementary?
No, but just to say, I don't actually have a Ring doorbell. I didn't realise they had to connect to Wi-Fi.
Other models are available.
I didn't realise all of them had to connect to Wi-Fi. So that probably made my whole question defunct. But thank you anyway.
Councillor Gardner.
Yeah, this is to you, Adam. You said about people going through bags to find out who's doing the fly tipping. I assume just be regular bags, not mattresses and things like that. I wasn't aware of the fact that people were doing that anymore. I've asked loads of times for stuff to be looked at, and the guys just throw it on the wagons. They don't look through it.
The waste services collectors probably won't look through the bags. What we would like to do is get, if there is definitive fly tipping, we can try and arrange for the bags to be taken to the depot, and then officers will attend there and go through them to try and find the necessary evidence. This is unlikely to happen in every single instance of fly tipping. What we would like to do is if we can target the resources that we have to try and focus on the biggest problem areas. Certainly bags have been gone through. I've done it myself in previous years, and to try and find that. It won't be done in every single instance of fly tipping, and sometimes we don't really get to hear about it until the waste service operator's they've done their job, cleared it, and moved on. We want to try and tie it into those areas and locations which are particularly bad, and also to try and use it as part of ongoing investigations where we believe that kind of evidence gathering will be of importance and usefulness to the council in securing any kind of direct enforcement action that may be taken. Thank you.
Councillor Gardner, do you wish to add anything? No. Councillor Farley?
Thank you, Chair. I've got a microphone that works. I agree with Councillor Sullivan. The Alligates, I speak for two different wards that I've been elected to. Fly tipping can be quite prevalent behind them. So Councillor Sullivan is quite right. I mean, I'm dubious about how effective alligators are in relation to reducing fly tipping. Yes, they are, as you said, they're effective in some places, often places not. Big issue that we've got with some of these things is that the stuff is behind there. You potentially have HMOs that are backing onto them. You've got people that have moved in. They're not particularly nice. Don't want to get involved. They're dumping their rubbish. They don't. People don't really sort of want to dob them in because they fear repercussions. And then, what happens then with the council's cost then to clear the stuff up, to get rid of rats, etc., that builds up as a result. I'm not saying it does. It's not. When I say, I think you are right. It's specific, but I do agree with Councillor Sullivan. There is a particular issue with the build-up. We have ones that we put in. The gates appear to be locked. Yeah, there's tyres. There's God knows what that's appearing behind the mattresses and whatnot. So it's a yeah. I have to say I am dubious on that.
Thank you, Councillor. There is undoubtedly a balance to be struck between passing matters over to residents, and of course what is difficult for residents is suddenly, I say suddenly, but perhaps gradually would be a better word, being expected to police, if you like, areas themselves. I do understand that is a difficult matter, and then they've requested something that has been installed, and then the next step is that they are taking responsibility for that. And without doubt there is an aspect of that related to the installation of alligating. I think there's no getting around the issue that what the council most wants is to install the gates and then have a working system that is very much reliant on resident buy-in and cooperation to make the system work. What the council would want to do, I think, is to strike a fine line between the initial period in which the gates are installed, in which there may be some aspects of it where there isn't a cooperation, and that some, for example, fly tipping continues to be prevalent, in which case we would be, I believe, offering information and advice rather than stepping in directly to do matters like that. And also the very large-scale fly tipping that Councillor Sullivan mentioned. I won't reiterate my response to that. Clearly, if there is a very large-scale problem, the Council can't just walk away from it, and I think that would be an incremental approach. I pause.
Sorry, Dan indicated before I saw you, Pabe. If you can just comment afterwards, we'll go to Dan first.
I think the easiest way of putting this is obviously everything is dependent on socio-economic factors, a whole myriad of factors in the background. I think what we can take away as a passive plus for all areas of Hillingdon is referring to the broken window technique. If you walk down the street and there's loads of broken windows, you start feeling unsafe, people will commit crimes. If you walk down the street, everything is pristine, no broken windows, you're less likely to go up to a wall graffiti and make other people intimidated or scared. With the gates, it shows that there is people considering the security in an area. So I can't say, if you the testimonials from all of the officers, they were all positive, including fly tipping. However, it's almost a business and they will do it somewhere. The answer is, are we just pushing them to an area where there isn't gated? So I think from the police side, we support the use of gated alleyways, very, very much so. If you're with me.
Pay?
I was just going to say, from my point of view, the fact that we put an alligator scheme in doesn't mean we're walking away from the problem. So if there's flights in there, we need to know about it and we will address it. I mean, HMOs are probably using a key for that. What we just got the balance is, well, I just put the mattress out and going to dump on Saturday, I didn't think it was in anyone's way, so it's just balancing that. But if we're getting inquiries from members, we will go and investigate those and pick those up and take those forward.
Thank you. Councillor Farley, do you wish to follow up? No. Councillor Punja.
Thank you, Chair. So from what I've heard over the last two sessions, what seems to be quite clear is that there's a lot of support for the residents before they apply for the alligating scheme. There is a lot of to get them to that scheme. They've got the scheme, and maybe when the residents are all happy with each other and and they're all cooperating, everything seems to work fine. Then you've got the opportunity where people move away. Maybe there's tenants that move in because one of the, I don't know, how homeowners becomes a landlord or something like that. And then the scheme starts changing for people. And it would be interesting for me to kind of, for us to be able to address that part of this scheme, because it's that part of the scheme, I think, that's failing the residents. And if we can get that support structure for people. I've got somebody contacted me recently, which is about tenants have moved in, they park their cars and they won't move them, and they're having huge problems with this resident. They've tried to talk to them, they've tried that, they get abuse. It's not somebody who's a homeowner there, it's a tenant there, so maybe they're temporary, they don't care. And there's other times when there'll be other residents who've moved and they're just not interested in the scheme for whatever reason. So I think that support kind of structure needs to be kind of given. I don't know if it's almost an alligator license that people have been given as homeowners or tenants, that they are liable for keeping that space clear, that it's a communal space, that they have a shared responsibility, and almost as if they sign that license, all of them together, that they actually have a responsibility for it. I don't know what kind of penal code there would be for something like that, but it just feels that support structure in between is not there, and that does need to be addressed, because that's where conflict is happening and that's where a lot of the problems are happening.
I would just refer back to the previous sessions where we've explained to councillors that the schemes vary dramatically between schemes where 5 properties might be covered, that's the minimum, up to schemes where it's 100 plus residents. So it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. I would say, I think Neil would back me up, in any instant where a lead resident comes back to us to let us know about any problems, we will always respond, and that response might either be signposting them to another service, or as we informed in a previous session, there's now, which was newly launched last year, an initiative to go back to historic old schemes to make sure that they are still functioning, and if they do need repairs or the locks changed and new keys issued, that we would be able to help with that as well. What we've also newly introduced is, I think at the last session we mentioned that we have a electronic database of all the key holders, and what we're doing is at least once a year making contact with all those key holders just to verify if their details are still correct and if they do still wish to be the key holder. What we're now starting to do from that is follow up, and if we don't get a response, that could be our lead to actually write out to all the residents just to see if we can attract a new key holder, and that's a chance to almost relaunch the scheme in terms of people taking responsibility as well. So as the scheme has evolved over 17 years, I think it's a constant evolvement in terms of kind of like new technology and things like that as well. So I would say that this review is very timely in terms of giving us the opportunity to think where we can still make improvements as well.
Adam?
Thank you, Councillor. Just to say that the example that you gave, where you mentioned vehicles and verbal abuse and other matters such as that, that's antisocial behaviour. It's not something that the council would walk away from or refuse to deal with because it's allocated. It would be something that we would want to deal with it, we would want to know about it, and we would want to take action swiftly, especially bearing in mind that there's an indication that the perpetrator is identified. So we would very much want to not leave that, get involved at the earliest possible opportunity, deal with the situation and take whatever kind of enforcement action is necessary to resolve it swiftly. Thank you.
Councillor Punjal, do you have a supplementary you wish to ask? Okay. I cannot see any other indications, so in which case I'll submit my two questions now, if I may. I'll start with Helena, and it's just in regards to, you give us lists of the gating schemes that are currently in place, which is very useful for us as members. I was just wondering if officers have done any forward planning in identifying sites that would be eligible for gating, and if, perhaps with GIS mapping, any potential sites that would be eligible, and if that could be passed down to both the police and ward councillors to perhaps lobby and influence residents at ground level to see if they would like to pursue the scheme. The honest answer would be no in terms of forward planning, mainly because the scheme has been designed to be resident-led and for applications to come from residents, and also in terms of allocating is just one aspect of the team's responsibility, which also includes administering the £1 million a year Christmas programme, and also ward budgets as well, and improving those services. But that's the reason why that hasn't been something that we've looked into. No, thank you for confirming that. I thought you'd say that, to be honest, which brings me on to my second question to Dan. Are your officers, do you believe your officers are aware of the council's gating scheme, and are they encouraging that when they come face to face with residents who experience crime, particularly around areas where they have alleyways by their properties? Are they aware of how to signpost residents to the correct channels within the council?
I could say yes, but I truly believe at this moment in time I'm going to say no, because when I was finding out for the testimonials, it was only the more experienced officers that were aware of the schemes, and this is something obviously dependent on deep dives into actually what's going on and us taking a reactive stance to a subject. It is something that when I identify that we can benefit from something like an allocating scheme, it's something that we will reach into. As I said earlier with this Design Out Crime team, when one of the questions was what support is the police going to give the council going forwards, our Design Out Crime team directly said that they will assign a doco to visit location, give feedback on the suitability to the venue, and make other crime prevention recommendations. It won't necessarily be just in relation, because they are fully trained in all physical security, and be able to give it, well, very costly security. So our promise is we don't have the resources or the manpower to do all the pre-existing, but if you have any ones that are flaring up or becoming uncontrollable or require assistance, my assurance is that we will support you in that. And for future schemes, if you require guidance, and as I said from the beginning, that they applauded them because they're autonomous and they haven't needed our support to date. And this team does most of West London, so they will supply support to all boroughs requesting the same advice for their alligating schemes, which is non-existent here. So the answer is yes. It will be a heavy consideration going forwards for us.
Thank you, Dan. I agree. One moment. With what you're saying, I think you're right. The experienced officers will know the scheme, but as you rightly know, the officer change around is consistent, and new officers may not necessarily be aware. And perhaps one way of doing that is for the council to provide literature to the police to take about on their patrols when they're just talking face to face with residents. It might be an opportunity to do that, and perhaps advertising via OWL as well.
What we have completed in the past is council officials actually have attended on our police training days, our PDDs, police development days, and giving in input into what their actual remit is and what they actually do at work. And then by that input, the officers, some of them very young in service, have said they know a name for a face and they've linked in with them directly to resolve problems. So this is sort of our continual training that we happily implement.
Adam.
I think the question's really been answered, but just to confirm, if there is an opportunity for the council to give more information to all partners, including the police, in terms of what the council can do, whether it's specific to an area or in more general terms, we would definitely take that opportunity and want to work with the police to make sure they've got the correct information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the officers for their attendance this evening and their presentation. It's been very informative for us as members, so thank you for that. We're going to move on to our next item now, but you are free to go if you wish to do so. Item 6 is the Antisocial Behaviour and Street Scene Service Development, and we have Stephanie with us this evening. Good evening, Stephanie. Whenever you're ready, please give your talk to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. You have received the paper, which really just seeks to give you an introduction and an update on where we are at the moment with the current restructure. As you would have heard in your September meeting last year, we were putting forward proposals to restructure the current ASBIT team and Community Safety Service, along with the other public protection and enforcement services, and realign them and carry out the full restructure. So we've moved on, you'll be pleased to hear, since the September meeting, and we've just finished the staff consultation this week. I'll just give you a brief overview. You've obviously all read the papers, but I'll give you a brief overview as to the main proposals for the 3 new teams. So essentially, we've taken the Antisocial Behaviour and Environment team that had broad responsibility for a range of street scene, highway, waste, and antisocial behaviour and environmental related matters, and we've split those into 3 distinct areas. So starting with the largest of those areas, we've formed the Street Scene Enforcement team, and they will really take on the bulk of the current responsibilities that are lying with ASBIT as we know it now. So they will deal with waste and fly tipping, fly posting, estate agents boards, abandoned vehicles, cars for sale on the highway, high hedges and obstruction, skips, building materials, hoarding, so there's highway offences, damage to the highway, pests, dog fouling, and also our public space protection orders. And this team will also have our contracted out service, so the on-street enforcement service, which is currently provided by APCOA, and they do the majority of our on-street enforcement, FPNs, public space protection orders, that sort of thing. We are seeing high levels of non-compliance, as you may expect, across the borough in all regulatory and enforcement areas. So we're seeing, as the cost of living crisis bites and COVID recovery and all these other sort of socio-economic factors, they are driving up higher levels of non-compliance, where businesses and residents are seeking to cut costs and cut corners. So there is this continued need for quite robust enforcement action. I've also included the structure for the new street scene enforcement team, which you have on page 23. The team responsible for investigating matters related to nuisance will form part of our environmental protection unit, and this will be a new team which forms part of environmental health, and they will have responsibility for statutory noise, dust, odour and smoke nuisance, light nuisance. So we're really talking about these environmental nuisances that can blight a lot of residents and businesses alike. And we have our out-of-hours noise patrol team, which will now fit under that environmental health service. So that team will also have responsibility for a number of regulatory activities associated with environmental health, which are currently contracted out. So we're looking to bring that back in-house. We've also got a structure there which will show how this new environmental protection team will be. And the third and final part of this restructure is the formation of a new ASB and locality service, and this will actually sit under the community safety side of this new directorate. And they will be responsible for a move to more of a locality-based problem-solving model. And they will have officers who will deal with sort of wide-scale, complex problem-solving in a locality, whether that's crime, antisocial behaviour, nuisance, could cross over into sort of tenancy or housing estate management, social care. So they will have connections with our internal partners, but also very importantly connected well with our external partners, police, etc., to actually solve the problem in their locality. So we've given you an idea of the next steps as well. So we're in the restructure and consultation process, and we'll be recruiting and finalising the roles and responsibilities and people into those posts. We're also doing further development on the street scene service plan and on-street enforcement strategy going forward, so that's a piece of work underway. The formation of the Environmental Protection Unit, this is a new team that will need recruiting to and setting up. We're reviewing our public spaces protection orders, and I believe you have this item listed at your next meeting. So we will be updating you as to the reviewed public space protection orders. And also, we've got the police turnaround plan on here. So the police have launched their police turnaround plan. So the next steps for us will be to ensure that our services, particularly on the community safety side, integrate well with whatever that model and that plan is going to look like in its final form. And also, there's been quite a lot of work going on digital transformation. So we are very aware of how important our triage and case management capability is in actually providing a modern and kind of efficient service. So we've been doing quite a lot of work at procuring and designing in a new digital system which will help us to not only case manage and performance manage effectively, but it will also assist residents and members in getting regular updates to their complaints and cases. On the final page of the report is the new service, the new directorate overall structure. Today you've received an update on the public protection and enforcement side. At a later date, once recruitment has taken place into sort of key leadership roles, you will receive a further update and a further report on the community safety and vulnerability side. I'm happy to take any questions at this point. Right.
Thank you, Stephanie. Perry.
Sorry, can I just add to that? In terms of the staff consultation, that process is still ongoing. So the date closed on Monday for staff to give us that feedback on the proposed structure. And there's a number of officers who are involved in this and it affects their roles, so that is ongoing still. So there's some bits we may not be able to go into too much detail about today. And just in terms of the director post, just to confirm that we have a director appointed who starts on the 9th of May.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gardner.
Yeah, thanks for this. Couple of problems, well, not problems, I hope you will resolve on page 26. We've got community safety and vulnerability. Can you somehow put domestic abuse vulnerability service? Because the police turnaround plan, excuse me, I've been talking to a lot of people recently, and the violence against women and girls is high up on their priority list in terms of like, the street safe, loads of things like that. But I know I keep banging on about it, but I'd like more work done with the domestic abuse. And the reason I'm saying that is I'm getting more and more reports from people coming in, and we've got a good reputation in this borough where people know that they can come to us and they can report to us. So basically, I suppose in a way we're guilty of our own success, but I am, well, you know that I keep an eye on exactly what's going on in terms there. It's like, but I'd like the vulnerability bit added to the domestic abuse services. Would you mind doing that so that everybody acknowledges that there people? I mean, victims of DV are vulnerable from the get-go, but it also includes their children and wider family. Yeah. Thank you.
Harry?
Yeah, no, totally agree, and we will amend the job description to make sure that's included, and when we're selecting the officer to take that post on, we will want them to demonstrate that they understand that area and can come in and take the service forward.
Anything else you wish to add, Councillor Gardner?
Sort of, but it's not on that. When you say the new team, the street enforcement team, incredibly long wish list of things that can do. I mean, it's like, how many do you think you'll get? And it's a bit things like persistent dog fouling. I'd really like to see the enforcement officers going around and following people with dogs on leads. It's things like that. I mean, and also there's a lot of stuff like high hedges and obstructed vegetation. That again is something that's down to an individual householder, how high they think their hedge should be. It's just like the people that are doing this are going to have to be incredibly diplomatic.
Yes, you're quite right. You'd be really surprised at the amount of complaints we get in for high hedges, and these are things that will obstruct highways or cause or block out light to neighbouring property. So they are actually quite a large volume of our complaints, and service requests does relate to overgrown vegetation. And where you've got overgrown vegetation in a wide area, it can become a hub for pests, fly tipping. So there's all sorts of peripheral issues that can result from overgrown vegetation. But yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things we've built into our new role, and we've got very, very clear lines of responsibility for those officers. So we've created some hierarchy in our structure. So we will have our kind of expert officers, our on the street officers, our managing officers. So we have got a wide range of ability and skill within that structure, which we hope will kind of help us to implement an effective approach to enforcing these issues. So we have our on-street enforcement, our rapid kind of response officers, but also our complex case investigators as well, who will deal with kind of the more meaty stuff and the kind of prosecution. So but yeah, you are quite right. It will take a lot of diplomacy in dealing with some of these issues.
Councillor Smallwood.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome this incredibly clear report. Seems to make an awful lot of sense to me. I guess my question is around when the public or we as members are reporting these ASB things, that we actually try and split that up so you report it in those categories. Because, you know, I still find it strange that the red clothes bin that has been illegally put into the Iceland car park in Ruislip is causing antisocial behaviour. You know, when I think about antisocial behaviour, I think about a load of oiks sort of outside McDonald's harassing people. I don't think about a red bin that people are going to put clothes in. So I think that will also help in a little bit of understanding to the public, especially. We as members shouldn't get it, but especially on panic, so they can streamline their complaints an awful lot better, which will make council services a lot more efficient.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think one of the things that we'll be looking to do alongside this restructure when we get to a little bit more of a final point and when we're recruited into these key positions is doing a bit of a comms campaign and a bit of retraining. So we're doing like a members training session. We'll launch something in Hillingdon People, and just to really kind of relaunch these services and redirect residents into the right place. So that is something that we're looking at the moment, is the comms side of it.
Councillor Small, do you have a supplementary? No. Councillor Sullivan?
Thank you, Chair. This one's for you, Steph. The street scene triage and performance. How quickly, excuse me, I've got a bad throat. How quickly will this be carried out if there is a, you've got to go deal with triage? How quickly will it be carried out, should I say?
Are you talking about by the time it gets to an officer to respond?
Yeah.
So each of the different categories of jobs will have their own response time. Some will be immediate if they're a real high risk public safety or public health risk. Some may be 10 working days. It really depends on what the issue is and what our own service parameters are for dealing with that issue. But we do already have a performance and triage function within the team. That officer has been with us for it must be about 12 months now, and we've seen some real improvements as to how the cases are arranged, sorted and allocated once they come through our front door, which has really helped us to kind of arrange the workloads and make sure we get it to the right patch officer. But the specific response time will very much depend on what the job is and how much of an immediate risk it is.
I come back to triage because it means urgency. But if you're saying a job, it won't be done in, say, 10 days or something, that takes away the triage bit, doesn't it?
We may have a different understanding of what triage means. I think in our context, it means the kind of sorting and allocating of different cases. So those cases will be sorted as to their different categories, which will determine our response time to go and deal with that particular job, and it will also sort the job into the right area. So we work on a locality basis, so we have different patch officers who will have responsibility for a ward, 3 wards, depending on what the areas are. So that's part of our triage process, is to sort and allocate effectively.
Councillor Farley?
Thank you, Chair. I have a few questions. I'll stick to 2 and maybe I'll come back at the end after everyone else has come with their questions. The out-of-hours service for noise, I feel there's a gap in that, particularly when you come to a weekend during the day. I had a resident who was is being tormented by a neighbour. I was given instructions to pass on to the resident for them to contact the out-of-hours service. They did. It was on a weekend. They were told, you can't do anything. You've got to log it online. That's no good to a resident when they're in tears of what's been going on for days, weeks, months. You've got out-of-hours noise controls listed here, patrols rather. I just feel I wonder if you can reassure me that gap is being filled, because I don't think it's. I mean, you can call the council during the day in the week. You can call the council or the out-of-hours during the night in the week. You can call the out-of-hours on the weekend in the night. There's a gap, daytime, weekend. Where's that service? Where it just hasn't been. So I'd like some reassurance that gap is being filled, please.
At the moment, we have no plans to alter the hours of the out-of-hours noise service. However, what I would say is that there are different proposals and different ideas for further restructure and further refinement of teams going forward. So what I would suggest is whatever we have now, it doesn't have to be set in stone. We can review that. If there is a business case and there are complaint levels to support the expansion of that service, then that is definitely something we can look at. But we would consider what the volume of complaints is for calls received during the day on a Saturday or Sunday, and we would make an assessment as to whether it's a service that is viable to provide as part of our out of hours rota. So I would suggest that we have whilst we have no immediate plans, it's definitely something that could be considered at a later date, given the supporting data that goes with it.
Councillor Farley.
Thank you. I mean, there's that kind of ASB, but there's obviously issues with planning, with people out making noises and whatever when they shouldn't be making them, again on weekends. So again, I believe there's a gap. Whether or not statistics bear that out, I don't know, but I know from personal experience, dealing with residents, that certainly is a gap that exists on weekends. I know it's to come next time round, but I just out of for my own interest, PSPOs, my understanding is there are only 2 that the borough has in operation. Is that correct? And if that is the case, what are they?
So we have one PSPO document at the moment that's in force, and that has a whole raft of restrictions and prohibitions. I couldn't tell you the exact number that is contained within our current PSPO, but it's around, I'd suggest about 15 to 20 restrictions or prohibitions. So it relates to things like dog fouling, littering, urinating in public spaces, spitting, all of these kinds of things that we are enabled to control via a public space protection order. And we have that's what we've reviewed, and we do have a proposal for the next PSPOs only last for 3 years, so at which point you have to renew them. So ours is up this year. We've reviewed it, and we've got some new proposals for members to consider as to what the next 3-year period PSPO should look like.
Thank you. Are there any other members wanting to ask? Councillor Punja.
I welcome an environmental protection unit, and that specifically deals with all of this. And one of the things that I wanted to just raise and just ask for, and I think Councillor Farley was talking about this, when it comes down to planning issues, because since I have been a councillor from May, I have been reporting the same issues again and again and again, and it's in the same area, and nothing seems to be able to be done about it because the planning has allowed these businesses to operate. How is that going to be addressed? Because that comes there, and it aligns even with the street enforcement teams of fly tipping. How are we addressing our neighbourhood plans of, you've got HMOs, you've got all of this stuff, which kind of probably, I'm sure, contributes to a lot of the fly tipping that goes on, especially in certain areas, including my ward. So how are we kind of tackling the allocation, and sorry, the other thing was abandoned vehicles, private parking, we've got so much land that is now being occupied by private landlords and private commercial developers, and yet we have abandoned vehicles that happen in that space, abuse that happens with residents, and I'm continuously told, it's a private land, it's private car parks, we can't do anything about it. But that doesn't help the residents who are having to deal with a business that is actually causing them nuisance all the time, and their service fees can't pay for the protection that they need. And we can't kind of let this carry on that way as a council, I don't believe.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking a lot about sort of integration with other services and what those lines of responsibility are. You mentioned a planning case. Is that a specific case that's causing nuisance?
It's actually quite a few.
I think the point to make is that environmental protection is a very unique set of legislative powers and responsibilities, and regardless of whether one arm of the council has given a permission or permitted them to do something. We have this crossover with licensing as well, food hygiene and lots of other regulatory areas. So whether or not one arm of the council has permitted something, it doesn't give that business, that householder, whoever, the right to disregard another regulatory regime. So, for example, if planning permit a pub to open only till 11 o'clock, they could go and get a licence till 2 o'clock in the morning, but they would be in breach of their planning. So we have to make sure that the regulatory and enforcement regimes are aligned, and it is a bit of a minefield for a lot of businesses and residents to navigate, but ultimately I think that's what we're there for, is to kind of help and assist in all of this. You had a follow-up.
Yeah, well, it's not about the residents navigating it. I just feel that it's also the officers navigating this, because we're coming, as councillors, I feel that we're coming against a stumbling block when councillors are not able to join those dots together as well, because if you've got planning saying that, okay, this place can exist and we're going to put all these mitigations on them, and yet when we're reporting the fact that they're violating those mitigations and nothing is being done about violating those mitigations, then what happens? Because, you know, we're talking about dust emissions and nuisances, noise emissions. You can complain, there's petitions, there's whatever, it's been going on for years, but still there doesn't seem to be any kind of monitoring, patrolling, any of that happening, to the point where people are getting really angry. And it just escalates, because whilst these companies are allowed to get away with it for so long, it just gets, you know, you give somebody an inch and they take a yard, and the string just gets longer and longer and longer, doesn't it? So, and then the problem becomes bigger, and then it becomes unmanageable.
I think from my point of view, that then lends itself into the localities model, and that's where we're bringing the localities team in, because we need that team to take ownership of. It's more of a project really, because it's not one team. It's not just noise. Well, actually, it's another team in the council. It's in a planning issue, or it's links into something that the police have got powers for. So cases like that need to fall into the localities model, where we can be much more targeted and have someone sitting there pretty much as a project manager saying, okay, that's 3 different departments who need to be doing something, and hold them to account to make sure they do it. And that's where those cases need to fall into that, where, you know, councillors are coming forward and saying this is a constant problem. There's no point giving it back to the ASBIT officer again. Let's give it to localities, because there may be other partners who we need to put into that conversation and engage with businesses and so on to tackle it. And that's the benefit of the localities going forward.
I welcome that, and I'd be having very many conversations with you.
I believe Councillor Farley has more questions he would like to ask. I cannot see any other indications, so I will just ask a quick question, if I may. This change is welcomed. It's good that it's clearly set out as to what the roles and responsibilities are. However, as you know, this department, ASBIT in particular, is a minefield when it comes to legislation. With these changes and officers taking up new posts, are you confident that your officers are receiving the sufficient training to be aware of the legislation, not just for the sake of knowing it, but in enabling them to be strategic in how they deal with that and use that legislation to the benefit of residents in their cases?
Yeah, thank you. One of the things we will be doing alongside this is refresher training across the whole service. So one of the things that we're looking at the moment is investigative skills training, Police and Criminal Evidence Act training. So all of the kind of pillars and training that you might expect an enforcement officer, regulatory officer to possess, we are going to be looking at that over the course of the year. So once we get the teams bedded in, we'll start looking at, because we need to kind of do it en masse again, we'll be looking at bringing training providers in-house. And now that we're part of one public protection and enforcement umbrella, we will be looking at sort of knowledge share with the regulatory teams that we already have and that are up to a good standard. So we're going to be looking at kind of a bit of shadowing, a bit of follow training, a bit of case preparation management, all of those things that will hopefully drive up the standard of the street scene enforcement team.
Thank you. And just further to that, how proactive will you be with officers in learning new legislation coming down from both the government and GLA? Legislation is changing all the time, and with this, in addition to knowing what's already in existence, what are you doing to learn new legislation that's coming in through the pipeline?
Yeah, so that's probably a role for me and the incumbent service manager that will be coming into this to manage this service. That will be our role, essentially, to keep up to date, be plugged into changes in legislation, as we are already with the kind of regulatory side of the business. You know, we're very aware of what's on the horizon. We're plugged into peer groups, London groups, officer groups across the sectors. So that will be the expectation on the service managers and team leaders of this new team.
Councillor Gardner.
So I just have a quick question. When you get the localities teams in place, will you get them to introduce themselves? Get them to introduce themselves to the actual councillors in the wards that they're working with, because believe it or not, a lot of councillors know exactly what's going on in their wards, and they could actually help them probably.
I think for me it will be key really that the invites go to the ward councillors to attend the meetings in those localities. So they will be running regular meetings in locations, and those invites will be open invites for councillors to attend those meetings.
Councillor Farley, floor's yours, fire away.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple. The measure that you put in the report, item 7, page 22, numbers of complaints. I appreciate it's coming off the back of the pandemic and whatnot, and the situation we have with the economy, etc. One thing that sort of leads in from that is leads out from that, rather, should I say, I'm not sure, but the new system that we've got now. So the council's pushing the digital, which again doesn't work in all cases, but I've had some issues with some residents that don't want to report it, they don't want to use the system, or they don't know how to, they can't access it, digital exclusion, etc., etc. I feel that maybe that's something that when you come back to this committee at some point in the future, there's a look around that area, if we can ask for that, please, and through the chair. Also with the fees on bulky waste. So in January, when we had the budget consultation for the committee, I think it was Councillor Gardner that was asking about the false economy potentially with that. So we were told at the time that would also be put under review, it would be monitored. So I just wanted to sort of make sure that also is something that would come back as well, part of a visit in the future, to make sure that we see if there's any correlation between the fees and increasing in fly tipping, in particular. Sorry, to make myself clear, but it's the correlation between that increase in fee and if there's an increase in fly tipping. So it was just to make sure that we're monitoring that as a council. I think that was about it from me, but just to get that and say through the chair, I'd appreciate if we could get those. Thank you.
Okay. Is that noted, Nicky? Yep. Okay. I think that's it then. Thank you for your attendance, definitely. If I could just also finally draw your attention to our work programme. We do have an ambition to visit the noise team as part of our frontline service visits. So if you could work with the clerk to perhaps arrange that in the coming months, that would be much appreciated. You may leave if you wish to do so. Thank you very much. Our next item is the Climate Action Plan Annual Update. Joe, thank you for your patience, and indeed Perry. Whenever you're ready, please go ahead and give your talk to the committee.
Thank you and good evening. As detailed in the report, I'm here to provide a progress update in relation to the Climate Action Plan. I've been in post and appointed as Climate Action Manager since October 2022, and since then the focus has been to continue the good work to date, to establish and document a clear roadmap to ensure the Council is on the right path to achieve its climate aspirations. To support this roadmap, a greenhouse gas baseline has been commissioned that will provide an updated emissions inventory incorporating our top 20 assets, provide recommendations on how we report moving forward and performance tracking, and deliver an updated net zero carbon emissions reduction plan. The updated reduction plan will also be used to support the delivery of our 6 corporate commitments, 9 key themes and our 22-23 objectives, and help develop our 23-24 objectives. As detailed in the report, we've had numerous grants success, and applications most recently were approved for public sector decarbonisation scheme. It's a refit of key sites that contribute to 50% of our carbon footprint. That will deliver air source heat pumps, double glazing, roof insulation, specifically at the Civic Centre, Winston Churchill, Hillingdon Leisure Centre and Highgrove. Further grant funding has been submitting and we're awaiting outcomes, and officers are actively reviewing opportunities available. A street lighting programme has been undertaken, delivering over a 59% kilowatt reduction since 2018. and a replacement LED lighting scheme is underway. Most recently in 2022, the Granges car park was completed, and we have seen consumption reduced by 38% in the last quarter. Green Spaces, the Tree for Cities programme continues into 2023, and a school screening programme has delivered 39 schools, and we are looking at a further 12 to date, and that obviously impacts air quality within those establishments. Procurement, we have introduced a low carbon procurement policy that is issued with all our tenders, asking suppliers to join us in collectively tackling the climate emergency and set out the actions that they will take to reduce their organisation's emissions. Out of the last 38 contracts awarded, we have 18 signed to the policy, and 12 have already stated that they have their own policy in place. So that is a little bit of history. So what's next? We are currently looking at renewables. A solar analysis and opportunities review is currently underway across the borough, with a view to expand our adoption of solar technology in the corporate estate. A school condition survey programme is currently being undertaken. Phase 1 is underway, and phases 2 and 3 will be completed by October, and outputs will be incorporated into plans. A biodiversity net gain feasibility study has been commissioned. B&G is land management approach that seeks to enhance the natural environment and leave it in a better state than when we first started. The sites that are being looked at are Park Lodge, Brookside, Gutteridge Farm, and the redundant holes at Uxbridge Golf Club. Obviously, we need to look at innovation as part of this as well, and conversations are currently taking place with City Tree. It supports green space without roots. It's a moss centrepiece tower and seating area that delivers immeasurable impacts, and further discussions are currently underway. Obviously, we need to work with other councillors and our partners. We're working with multiple London groups. LEDNet provides collective leadership on climate action and environmental issues. The West London Climate Emergency Group is consistent of 9 other boroughs, and we're currently developing a new action plan that's looking at retrofitting and energy infrastructure, transport, net zero communities, to name but a few. And these are all linked back to the the key things that are delivered part of LEDNet. We're having continued dialogue with Hillingdon Friends of the Earth, and have got a meeting with them next week to talk about opportunities to work together. And obviously working with all of these groups is key to tackle the national challenge. A further progress report is being presented to Cabinet in September, once all of these surveys and feedback is completed, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you very much, Jo, and welcome to your newly appointed role. I'll begin with Councillor Gohill.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks, Jo, for your presentation. Could you just comment on some of the things that are being some of the projects that the council are currently working on? So specifically, I have written down the West Drayton Leisure Centre. Is that on track? That's currently being built, but is that currently on track to help us achieve our goals of being net zero by 2030? But just to give a bit of background, that it doesn't make sense that if we're building on something to then add to it later. But whilst we're in the building phase, it makes sense to incorporate those changes so we kind of future-proof the new facilities.
I think in terms of the design, so most of all things as they go through planning now, they need to demonstrate that they're going to be net zero or offset their carbon. Leisure Centre is a very challenging one because we've got a lot of water to heat. It has all the latest technology built into the design. Everything you can put a solar thing on, the solar thing is on. And there is something that says it will be net zero in the year, I can't remember the year off the top of my head, so it's designed to that standard. And planning, obviously, all things coming forward now will be built to a standard. And that's a lot about the biodiversity and net gain. So anything that can't deliver net zero has to demonstrate it somewhere else. So yeah, no, that's key for that design.
Do you have a follow-up, Councillor Gohill?
Yes, I do, thank you. And just to follow up on that briefly, does that do an increase in sustainable measures or things to kind of push us towards net zero? Is that also being included in other projects? So I'm particularly thinking maybe like housing developments or things like that. If we, housing is an important issue, and the increase for housing is going to happen over the next X years, it makes sense to, especially with social housing or council housing, to include measures to make it more carbon neutral. Is that happening, or will it be happening rather?
Yeah, I mean all new developments pick up on the carbon stuff and have every measure you could fit into those. Key one for us will be the Hayes Regen schemes, where we're designing them to be, really low energy use buildings, and lots of residents will talk about energy bills, but some of the energy bills will be a lot less because of the systems and how they're designed and the installation and how they're built. And then our existing stock, we have a healthy program of going in and doing installation and new boilers, and all those schemes are rolling out across our states.
Any other questions, Councillor Small?
Thank you very much. I just wondered what work we are doing with local residents around places of sort of natural beauty in Hillingdon. So Hillingdon is, in my ward of Ruislip, we're very proud to have Ruislip Wood, which is a triple SI, and members don't know that's a site of special scientific interest, and the only other one in London is actually Richmond Park, and that looks at wildlife, geology and landform as there. So how we're working with some of the residents groups as an example, and I'm sure there is others that do it. But also I wanted to ask about the challenge of Heathrow Airport, and I think on both sides of this council for a long time, when it comes to air quality, we have fought hand in arm in arm around air quality and the potential of a third runway at Heathrow, and I know the council is committed to stopping that, but how are we holding, as much as we can, Heathrow accountable and buying them in, because they will want to, tick boxes around the environment, or be seen to tick boxes around the environment. How are we working with them as that massive polluter in our borough to do it? Because as we know, if we took Heathrow out of Hillingdon, it would be the second, from an environmental perspective and clean air, be the second clean air in old London. But with it, obviously, we're not.
I mean, I'll pick up on the Heathrow point. I mean, obviously, Joe, you've only been doing this October. If you could fix Heathrow, that would be great. I think for me, it's about, I've had a couple of conversations with the directors at Heathrow, and they are keen to engage with us more on their plans. There are some funding through the airlines and various initiatives they've got. I mean, the industry doesn't evolve that quick, does it, in terms of where they are? But we have got an open dialogue with them, and we will be exploring that with them around what we can jointly do in that area. In terms of the green spaces, I think there's an open question really, probably, nationally around the benefit of these open spaces. So, green spaces this year would have planted nearly 17,000 trees, but, where's the formula around what does that actually mean in terms of netting off carbon and air quality is the calculations that we're working on at the minute. So, I think it's about that, and then getting more partners involved.
Yeah, as part of the kind of 23-24 programme, a development of comms is underway. We're looking at options of how we kind of reach out to the wider community and start kind of, once we've got the baseline figures, is kind of putting those figures out there and then kind of reaching out to our partners.
Councillor Small, do you wish to follow up?
Yes, please. On a different topic around LED car parks, I'm really pleased that we're putting in LED lights, fully support it. Two questions. One around what is our coverage now of LED lights in our lampposts, but also around, I'm not an LED light expert, just for the record, but some of them are less bright, and I think Councillor Gardner will agree with me when I say this, around especially safety for women, when they are less bright. I've actually had women report to me concerned that they are walking down streets that are less well lit because they now have LED lights in. So there's kind of like this trade-off going on. And it's a really, really difficult one, right? I can see members opposite and members on my side nodding. And I just wondered what our coverage was, but also how we deal with that issue that putting LED does reduce the light pollution, in inverted commas, but does have another impact elsewhere.
In terms of the LED, we're pretty much there across the borough. I mean, someone will go out and find one that isn't now, but the bulk of our street lights are done. You're very right, the old big bulb outlight everywhere. LEDs are very directional. Where we've had concerns that the coverage isn't good, then the highways team have gone out and done surveys, and in some roads we have put extra lighting up and we jig things. What we did, we changed the light bulbs, which was an expensive exercise but worthwhile in terms of saving carbon, but we didn't go and start moving lampposts around. And where people have come to us, there's been a couple of cases where we've increased columns or had to put a second light on, but we'll review those cases as they come up.
Councillor Punjar.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. That's one of the things that I was going to raise, actually. So thank you, Councillor Smallwood. I'm really proud of the Trees for Cities partnership as well, because I've engaged with Trees for Cities for quite a while, and I've been on their tree planting sessions, so I know about all of I'm really grateful and really glad that we are doing something like that as a passionate tree planter. What I am going to say, though, is that we've got to be mindful of saplings that we plant as trees take time for reducing carbon emissions. So I'm equally excited about looking at city trees as an option, which was part of Councillor Farley's motion a couple of months ago. And one of the things, as you are talking to Heathrow could be a very good sponsor of city trees. So I hope that that's going to be something that you will be talking to them about, because it's quite a large investment, and actually, as one of the largest polluters, they could actually be contributing quite heavily with advertising and sponsorship and all the rest of it that goes with it on those on something like that. So they were the two things that I wanted to talk about, and also about the retrofitting. Retrofitting of our housing stock is probably going to be the single most important thing in terms of warm homes, and also to cool homes as well in the summer. So as much as we're retrofitting in terms of insulating, are we looking at almost like green roofing sometimes, which can be quite low cost when you're building new, to provide warm and cool spaces in our new builds and new homes that we're going to be putting together.
I think the Trees for Cities is given. We're looking at those, and we've got a couple of providers talking to us, and as you say, they're not cheap, but sponsorship is a good option for people on that. In terms of our homes, then obviously we are building to certain standards, and we need to look at that. Our main challenge at the minute is that insulation to stop the energy bills, but cooling will equally be an issue. Some of the issues are it's expensive to do some of these things when they're retrofitted, so we're reviewing that now and working out what's best and how quick we can get it out there. But there are programs that we're working through as we speak.
Councillor Gardner.
Regarding the LED lights, that's what they call them, the police have got a thing called Street Safe. If you liaise with them, they will be able to tell you where women don't feel, or anybody doesn't feel safe when they're walking about. So that actually, rather than reinvent the wheel, perhaps if you could ask the police to let you know of areas of concern, so you can then go and have a look. Yeah?
That's really helpful. Thank you. Yeah.
Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. I just want some clarification on the highways point on page 34. So there's a new mixture of asphalt, or I'm not sure if this is for repairing and or resurfacing roads. I'm just curious about the quality of the stuff and how long we've been using it for. And then that may precipitate another question. Thank you.
We've run a couple of trials this year, and the quality so far is looking exactly the same. In the main, it's very similar materials. It's literally turns up warmer than the other materials, so it takes less carbon to heat it to roll it out. So it's kind of a warm mix. It's turning up pre-warmed, warms up quicker than the other stuff, so therefore takes less burners and gas to get it to that temperature. But so far on our trials, it's performing well, so we want to monitor for a couple more months to make sure that big potholes don't appear and it stands up to heavy lorries going over it, and then we'll be putting recommendations forward for whether it's a sustainable thing. It's quite limited in the highway world in terms of innovation at the minute, so it's something we need to explore and make sure it's right.
So just for clarity then, where you've trialled it, this is for resurfacing roads, you've not done it on potholes yet?
Not on potholes yet.
Not yet, okay. Because I know with some of the, I don't know whether all this is workmanship or the quality of the substance, but you find that potholes get filled in and then weeks later the stuff's come back out again and the pothole is so I was just curious as to whether that was something that maybe with this, and if it works it's great, but it's something that is going to be more substantial to repairs as well. Thank you.
it's probably a separate review with highways, but we are looking at a different machine to fix potholes at the minute. We're out to the market. We're down to a couple of new providers in terms of potholes.
I do believe the relevant committee is looking at the highways, in particular the Rhino patch machines, which have been not working for some time now. Councillor Gohill, so did you have a follow-up? Okay, Councillor Gohill.
Thank you, Chairman. I have 3 questions, but I understand the 2-question rule. But if there's anyone else who wants to jump in, I'm happy to pause. Yeah, thank you. The first of all, having read through the list of priorities for 22-23, I thought they were great. I identified 1 or 2 points where there might be additional priorities if possible. So, in order to get closer to achieving net zero, I think yes, there's a lot that can be done from businesses, a lot that can be done from the council as well, but there also has to be viable alternatives. So I was wondering if there could be scope to add an additional priority to increase engagement with TfL or with the GLA to improve public transport and options in Hillingdon specifically, whether that be increasing the number of EV buses, increasing the number of bus routes available, which we've talked about quite often at council meetings before, or extending the tube line, the central line to Uxbridge Station, for example. There's lots of different possibilities there, but if it can be added, or if that can be explored, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that our transport team are constantly in contact with TfL, trying to encourage new bus routes or extensions of things, and TfL do support us in things like cycling and other bits and pieces, so there is joint work going on, and we definitely need to explore more. So, yeah.
Thank you, that's very reassuring. It wasn't read in the priorities list, so I thought I'd mention it anyway. And the other thing that we might have scope to look at, and I know housing comes under the remit of this committee as well, so it's not entirely irrelevant, but perhaps looking at housing policy slightly for a specific reason of removing the need for my laptop nearly died, I nearly lost my question. Removing the need for planning permission for solar panel installation for all types of properties. So I'm thinking particularly those without permitted development rights. So a lot of the newer builds that have occurred, including those in St Andrews Park just opposite, and across the borough, they all don't have the same permitted development rights and have to go through planning permission that can act as a deterrent. So maybe perhaps the removal of that could be a sensible move to encourage people to install panels, reduce their reliance on traditional gas and traditional grid, and moving towards more sustainable ways of adopting electricity for the future.
I'll take that back to my planning colleagues. I wouldn't like to give a commit on that in terms of planning policy, but it's a valid point, and I'll take it back to them.
Councillor Smallwood.
Thank you, Chair. I just wonder if we could have an update on the rapid vehicle charging points, which I know are would be interesting to see where we are on those as people move towards battery-powered cars, and also potentially, the council would have a conversation with the mayor and the GLA about potentially bringing back the boiler cashback scheme, which I thought was quite a good scheme in reducing emissions and getting people, I'll say greener boilers. I don't know if that's the right phrase or terminology to use. I think it might be, but whether there's something we can do to encourage that, because I thought that was quite good.
In terms of the rapid charging points, we are currently out to tender for a provider. I do believe it's on the June forward plan for Cabinet, which will bring forward, and then you'll see a fast rollout across our estate on that technology. In terms of the cashback, again, probably something for our transport team to pick up in their conversations with TfL.
Councillor Smallwood.
I'm massively for getting battery-powered cars and more people there, but I actually think this is going to be something that fills a gap for a short period of, well, probably not in our lifetimes, but in the lifetimes of the environment. It's going to fill a gap for a short period of time, and we're actually going to move towards hydrogen very, very quickly, in my personal opinion, which is cheaper, lighter, and a lot more efficient than quite heavy batteries. It goes further, yeah. I just wondered what forward planning we were doing as a council to think about how potentially in that 10, 20 years forward plan thinking, we can use hydrogen, whether it be on our fleets for our trucks or whatever that may be.
I mean, in terms of it, again, we're getting our EV out. We'll need to see where that technology goes. As you say, things are changing so fast, and things will come along, and then they'll be very expensive for a period of time. So it'll be based on supply and demand and what we need to do to facilitate residents' needs. Really, we've got to track those markets.
Thank you very much, Councillor Punja. Use your microphone, please. Sorry.
Thank you. I just wanted to kind of extend Councillor Gohill's point, actually, because I think it's quite good about the permitted developments. But so taking it back, and I have no idea where this goes and who this goes to, and even if it's possible, but it's just a thought process I've had for quite a long time, that when people are getting planning permissions to extend their homes, there is no requirement on them to actually make their homes energy efficient or green their homes up. And I don't know whether it's council policy, whether it's, I don't know, I don't know where that sits, but it would just be really interesting to be able to, even if it was putting solar paneling up, or even if it, whatever it was to do, but people are not moving homes as much now, they are extending their homes, and that requirement is something that, as we move to net zero, that is something that could be undertaken at some point.
As I say, valid points. I need to pick that with the planning team. Interesting.
Anything further to add, Councillor Bridges? No. If I can just go on to the grant section of the reports. Congratulations to the officers for securing this, may I say for the start. Perhaps I can just turn this the other way round though. How many grants were we unsuccessful? And maybe you can just talk us a little bit about the process of how that works. So is it on a needs basis for each authority? Is it early bird catches the worm, that sort of thing? If you can just give us a bit more detail on that, please.
I mean, grants get advertised by central government in terms of opportunities there. Officers then have to pull together a business case to put forward. The issue with a lot of the grants, they are quite time limited. You have a really short window to put your applications in. So it's about officers being ready with ideas and schemes that they're working up. And then you put your submissions in. The other issue, when you get grants, they are quite tight in terms of the delivery timescales. So again, you have to be ready to deliver them and go forward. I do believe that in the main every grant we've applied for, we've got, and I don't think we've missed many opportunities in the market for putting things forward. And then we get the grants and we work up schemes, but they all come very tight, strict measures and deliverables. I know on wave one, we probably delivered more than anyone in London against our grant, because it came with such tight restrictions on what you could do and how people were eligible, so they're quite hard to manage. But so far the team have got 100% success rate in everything they've applied for.
Thank you. And are these only done solo for each authority? Have we ever considered team up with a neighbouring authority if there was an area of interest where we felt we could perhaps be more successful if we did a joint bid?
There has been a couple of joint bids with West London, and to my knowledge, there have been mixed results in terms of how that's delivered. So in the main, we put ourselves forward, and we've got enough need of our own to take that forward and drive it on.
Thank you very much. Any other questions before we finish? Councillor Farley, go on.
If I may, just going back to the highways thing, can you tell us where those trials were done, please?
Yeah, I'll let you know.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe Perry, for your presence this evening. It's been very informative, and you may leave if you wish to do so. Not that there's much left to discuss after, but thank you very much. Item 8 is the floor plan. Councillor Garner. I knew he was going to say that. The work programme, are we happy to note as well? Thank you. Sorry, go on.
Can I just make one point? There's just something in the last report referring to boilers that says there'll be a further update that forms part of the Cabinet update in 2023. I was just trying to work out where that Cabinet update would be and whether that was a Cabinet update to Cabinet or that was a Cabinet update that comes to the Select Committee. Because there's nothing there, unless I've missed it, 'cause it's quite small, specifically on boilers.
Page?
Apologies, in the previous report, page 30 at the bottom. It worked very well. Heathrow Drives are very happy.
On this report?
Yeah, it just says part of the Cabinet update 2023. It doesn't give any. We can take it offline and look
Is that right?
through
Sorry, Chair.
democratic services if that's okay, and just get some details.
Apologies for
on
not raising that with you sooner. I noticed it in the meeting.
Okay, is that noted? Thank you very much, and thank you for your attendance. Declare the meeting closed. Have a safe journey home. Thank you.